Hi, everybody, and welcome to Odd Week Sunday School for February 7th, if this is when you're listening to this. We're still in the Gospel of Mark, and we're going to sort of pick the story up where we left it off last week, still in the first chapter of Mark, and in fact, still in the same day that we talked about last week. So our text for today is the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verses 29 to 39, and we'll read that in a few minutes, 1:29 to 39. So as we've said, this is Mark's Gospel, the second one. It's the shortest of the four versions of the life and teachings of Jesus, and Mark packs a lot into every chapter. These chapter and verse numbers, it's kind of worth remembering right now, were not part of the original manuscripts. They were added much later, so that even though it seems very natural to us right now to do what we're doing, pick out several verses in one chapter and really bore down and study those separately, this is not how people would have used these writings in their own day. People would have either heard pretty much the whole thing recited by a storyteller or a teller, or they would have read it in one whole chunk. It wasn't divided up. Just something to think about. Today's text is really a continuation of what we talked about last week, verses 21 to 28. You might remember Jesus went into the synagogue in Capernaum. He was delivering a sermon, and then he confronted a man with an unclean spirit, and he healed him. And everybody talked about it. It was his first miracle according to Mark. So let's sort of recap what Mark has in chapter 1, which is basically the introduction to Mark's story of Jesus, and then we'll catch the story up where today's scripture is. Chapter 1 of Mark, after being baptized by John the Baptist, enduring a period of testing in the desert, tested by the devil for 40 days, he began his ministry of preaching and healing in the countryside and small towns of Galilee. As he walks along, Jesus spots Simon and his brother Andrew, later James and his brother John. He invites them to follow him, and they all do. All four of them were fishermen. And somehow Jesus says to all of them this very strange thing that is for some reason appealing. Jesus says, "Come with me, and I'll make you fishers of people." You kind of wonder what these four men thought they were going to be doing if they followed him. It surprises us maybe that these people would just drop everything and follow Jesus, sight unseen. We do have a little clue in John's gospel. John tells us that Simon and Andrew, the two brothers, were actually first disciples of John the Baptist. And if they were disciples of John the Baptist, I think we can assume that they knew something about Jesus. They had perhaps witnessed John baptize Jesus and say, "He's the one." So Simon and Andrew were prepared for this invitation in some way. So now we see all of these people in the town of Capernaum on the Sabbath day. So what I want us to sort of think about today is this literary day, a day in the life of Jesus the teacher, because all the way from verse 21 to verse 32, it's all just one action-packed day that Mark is describing. And maybe Mark wasn't really saying that this was actually one of the days in the life of Jesus. It's not a diary entry. It's not a chronicle that Mark is writing. So maybe it's a literary day. It's a day that Mark constructed out of various stories to pack in things into the story of this one day that really introduce to us who's Jesus and what's his ministry all about. So let's sort of think of it as one day. It's also a day that depicts a lot of other people who react to Jesus. A lot of these people seem to be pretty clueless about who he is or what he's going to do, but they all find him interesting. He's intriguing, challenging, surprising, and he can heal people. So they're attracted to him. They follow him, and maybe they can't themselves really explain why. So reviewing verses 21 to 28 that we talked about last time, it's the Sabbath day, so it must be morning. He goes into the synagogue. Jesus starts teaching there with authority. He's interrupted by this loud man with the unclean spirit who calls him by name and says that he's the Holy One of God. Jesus casts the unclean spirit out of the man and heals him. And the people in the synagogue, naturally enough, are amazed. They call this a new teaching with authority. And they're so impressed by it, incidentally. Notice they don't even seem to get very worked up by the fact that since it's the Sabbath day, Jesus has kind of done something wrong. He's performed this act of healing and this good deed on the Sabbath, and he should have really waited until later, after sundown. So Jesus becomes famous around Galilee instantaneously, according to Mark. And now here's where we pick up today's passage. So remember, as I read this, verses 29 to 39, the passage starts out on the same day that we were just talking about. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up, and then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. And when they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. So they went from the synagogue, where the first miracle occurred, where Jesus had caused a stir confronting this evil thing, and they went to the home of Simon Peter, as we'll call him, and Andrew. It seems that Simon must be the head of this household because his mother-in-law lives there, so presumably his wife lives there too, maybe children. I don't know. And Andrew lives there, so Simon's apparently the older brother. It seems like a full house to me because James and John come along, and it sort of seems to me that Jesus spends the night there. I don't know if you remember a few weeks ago, Derek preached on the calling of Peter and Andrew, Simon and Andrew, when Jesus said in John's gospel, "Follow me." And when he said, "Follow me," Peter said to Jesus, "Where are you staying?" Remember that? And Jesus said, "Come and see." Well, we switch over to Mark's gospel. Here's the cute thing. Apparently, where Jesus was staying was at their house. So that was something to come and see. So Jesus and this group of his followers get to the house, Simon's house, and they tell him right away that Simon's mother-in-law is sick with a fever, and they want, of course, Jesus to heal her, which he does. He tells her to get up. He kind of helps her up, and she's healed. And she's very grateful. She responds by just getting out of bed and serving them, maybe giving them something to eat. Now, many commentators call this grateful woman, Simon's mother-in-law, the church's first deacon. In fact, the word for serve in the Greek version of this Greek book, she serves them. It's the same word from which our word for deacon comes, one who serves. She serves the Lord and his friends just out of gratitude and without being asked. She's a deacon. Now it finally starts to get dark. Sunset on the Sabbath day. And notice that now that it is sunset, the Sabbath is over. So now it's permissible for people to come over here and ask for healing. So now at sunset, masses of people who heard about this healing miracle and who've all got people, in their families, they themselves suffering from diseases, how desperate people must have been for relief from pain and suffering, and demons, unclean spirits. They start to gather outside the door of this crowded house, and they want Jesus to heal them, and he does. He keeps this up for a while, long time, healing people who were sick for various diseases and casting out unclean spirits and not letting the spirits speak because they knew who he was. But that's very strange. Why was he keeping his identity a secret? Did Jesus think that the testimony of these demons might not seem so trustworthy to people or convincing? Or maybe it was that Jesus wanted people to keep watching what he did rather than giving them an explanation about who he was. They would know who he was if they watched what he did. He wanted them to know what the Holy One of God was doing, which was more important than what anyone else right now was saying. Anyway, eventually Jesus must have gone to bed. We know that because later he gets up. And one reason it seems that they must have all been staying in this one house that night is because Jesus got up very early when it was still dark, and he sort of, tiptoed away quietly, looking for a quiet place somewhere outside where he could sit with God for a little while, pray. But they noticed that he had gotten up and slipped out, and they went looking for him. So Jesus was starting the next day, as maybe he had started the day before, we don't know, with prayer, quiet time with God. He had to get himself out of that crowded house where everybody wanted something from him, at least for a little while, so that he could have a little time to sit with God. As I assume most of you know, Jesus was not the last person who sometimes had to get up very early in the morning to get a little bit of peace and quiet. But it doesn't look like his prayer time lasted all that long, because pretty soon Simon and the others found him. He must not have gone too far away. And is it going too far to imagine a little bit of disappointment, a little bit of scolding in the way that Simon addresses Jesus when they find him? Everyone's looking for you. As though everyone had a right to find him. They all had a right to a piece of him. They all needed him to heal them, to confront their demons. And when they tell Jesus that, and he doesn't resist at all, he gets up and says, "Let's go." And they're off, preaching and healing, proclaiming the message, and casting out demons all over Galilee. Just as this text gives us one day, one literary day, an action-packed day for Jesus, for those following him, and for the crowd that witnessed his ministry, we might also say that it gives us one tiny little church. This church didn't have any walls, but it was assembling its congregation, a cast of characters we might recognize. There were the leaders, the people who had witnessed the power and love of Jesus in his acts of compassionate healing, people who just had to get as close to him as they possibly could, even though there was a lot they didn't get. It's not clear they even understood exactly who he was. Maybe they didn't understand as much as the unclean spirits understood. That came later. But they had to follow him. They had to get as close as they could. Then there was the grateful servant, the deacon, the woman who was drawn to serve him and others just out of gratitude for the relief that Jesus had brought to her. And then there were the crowds, the clamoring and very needy people, the suffering people, who were maybe even a little pushy. Because after all, seeking relief in a lot of places, they were gripped now by a new hope that this one might really be the one that they were looking for, the one with authority. It's just like Simon said to Jesus, "Everyone is searching for you." And at the center, there was the Holy One of God, Jesus of Nazareth, the preacher of Galilee, who proclaimed the message without many words. And what was that message? Maybe it's hard to say in words what a wordless message is. But if we just come and see, if we just watch what Jesus was preaching with his time, with his day, to this little church, we see what God is about. God is about putting people back together. He's about making them whole and holy. God is about confronting the evil that grips people right away, face to face. God is about being here in our neck of the woods, moving around from town to town, seeking the ones who need to hear the message. The people get up and go out about their day, and God is out there looking for them. Something to think about. So now until I see you again in 2 weeks' time, stay well.